there, and welcome to Coming Back, a podcast about coming back to life after loss. This week, we'll talk to my friend, holistic dietitian Cindy Klinger, and find out what she really wants you to know about her father's suicide. Also on the show today, a listener messaged me on Facebook for advice on her grandmother's upcoming funeral, and I share some things that I learned about grief and grieving after airing my very honest truth episode last week. I'm Shelby Forsythia, an intuitive grief guide who gives people the tools, space, and support to come back to life after loss. My mom's death in 2013 set me on the path to becoming a lifelong student of grief, and I use what I learned to equip others with the knowledge to heal and remind them that they are not alone. Because even through grief, we are growing. Let's get started. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Coming Back. I am so honored to have you here listening today. Before we start, I have a small favor to ask of you. I'm really excited because my birthday is in 10 days on August 12th, and I will be turning 25, a whole quarter of a century. And there's always been some humor in me turning 25 because of a funny story that involves my mom that I'd like to share with you. So once when my sister and I were younger, we were watching something on TV in the afternoon on PBS or one of those educational channels. I think it was like Antique Roadshow or Storage Wars or Flea Market Hacks or something. I don't remember. But what I do remember is at one point during the episode, the host is talking to somebody selling their wares in a booth. And they said, well, you know, anything over 25 years old is considered an antique. and grief growers, I wish I could give you a visual of this. My sister and I sitting on the floor watching TV, we rotated our heads so slowly after we heard this. We did the slowest slow motion head turn towards my mom, who was sitting on the couch behind us watching the show. And this huge, devious smile came over both of our faces. And we said, Mom, you're an antique. And my mom was never somebody who was overly hung up on her age. It didn't really seem to affect her how old she was, but being called an antique seemed to matter in that moment, and she pretended to be mad. She rolled her eyes at us, and I think, if I remember correctly, I think she used the line that she had used so many times when she was fed up with our antics, which was, "Stupid kids!" And turning 25 or being over 25 became a running joke for us, and that's something that's always stuck with me and stuck with my sister. So when my sister and I were talking on the phone last week, she said, "This is your antique year." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "You're turning 25. You're going to be an antique." So grief growers, for my 25th birthday, for this antique birthday, I have a favor to ask you, a gift if you're into giving birthday gifts. Sometime between now and August 12th, I would love for my birthday if you rated and reviewed my work over on my Facebook page, which is Shelby Forsythia Intuitive Grief Guide. I know so many of you are active with me on Facebook because I see your likes and your comments and photos posted over there, and I would love if you could give me some stars and some thoughts about the work that I do. So if you've been a client of mine, tell us about your experience. If you listen to the podcast, tell us what you think of the show or how it's impacted your life. If you just like the things that I post about grief and loss or the fact that we're normalizing grief one episode at a time, let us know how reading those articles, how seeing that message has changed your outlook on grief and loss. My goal is to get 25 reviews for my 25th, my antique birthday. I would be so grateful for your stars and your words. And again, that Facebook page is Shelby Forsythia Intuitive Grief Guide. Now, I want to talk about last week. If you haven't listened to episode 11 called The Truth, I strongly encourage you to because you'll get a great idea of what I'm talking about now. This episode was a crazy and unexpected departure from my usual show format, and it's because I was grieving. I couldn't do anything more than last week's episode in terms of time or content. I just couldn't. I was literally crying on this show. It was this episode was a 5-minute long just outpouring of everything that I was experiencing that day. It was the first time I just turned on the mic and started to speak. No script, no layout, no nothing. It was the first time, besides my intro episode, that I had done a really short episode. And yes, it was the first time I have ever cried on this show. I won't necessarily go into detail about what happened in my life last week, but if you'd like more insight than what I'm offering here, you can find a long-form post from me over in my private Facebook group, The Grief Grower's Garden. And I actually found a lot of support there last week. It was really amazing. But what happened basically is that my heart was broken. Yeah, I don't know if there's a better way to phrase it than that. My heart was broken. And it's so crappy because society says, or our parents say, we say brokenhearted or I'm heartbroken, and immediately it conjures up all these images of lost teenage puppy love, or love that never got to be, like unrequited love, or being so sad someone's died that you can't function. And they're all singular images, but none of these are the full picture of heartbreak. They're valid. Yeah, they're 100% valid, but they're not the full picture, or at least they weren't for me last week. My reality of a broken heart was literally being cracked open to the darkness at the center of my spirit. It looked like an unshakable, firmly held belief that I had no ground to stand on, that all love and all trust I had ever been promised or given in my life was a lie, and that ultimately life is not worth living. I was in a place last week, I was in a place that was without love, without hope, and without faith. And if you remember those 3 Ps that hinder recovery that we talked about in episode 2, they are: the loss is my fault. The heartbreak affects all areas of my life. I will feel this grief forever. There is no way out. Yeah. It's dark. That's where I was last week. It was very dark. I was in a very dark place last week, and there's residual of that lingering now. Heartbreak just doesn't vanish overnight, but I scared myself with how dark I got. There was a point in my day where I couldn't take another rejection of my spirit, another piece of proof that my life doesn't look anything like I wanted it to or like I thought it would. And so I went into my room and I put down my bags and I shut the door. I put my favorite music right there in my ears. And I fell to my knees, and I just screamed. I raged. I pounded my walls with my fists and my palms and my head, and I made these guttural crying sounds. If you've ever seen like a toddler throw a tantrum in the grocery store, you know what the depth of these yells sound like, but this wasn't a tantrum. This wasn't about candy or a toy or bedtime. This was about my life and my heart. It was about the pieces of my heart that I gave, and the pieces that I could never get back, and the pieces that I couldn't even feel anymore. I said, "How dare you?" I said, "God, fuck you." I said, "God, you left me here." Violation, betrayal, abandonment. This is what grief looks like. That's what my grief looked like last week. That was real for me. Unfortunately, my grieving and raging went on for a little too long, or it was too loud, because my neighbors ended up calling the police. And I found myself sitting on the floor talking to an officer doing a wellness check about being brokenhearted. And after learning I was heartbroken, not injured or not mentally ill. He said talking gets it out. He said just talking to you can't talk about it anymore. And yeah, I know. I do grief work. I know. The power and the impact of sharing our stories in a group. I've already seen it from this podcast here. But sometimes, and I'll hold on to this sometimes, you just need to scream. Yeah. If you remember in episode 5, I talked about losing our voices, keeping them in and stifling them when we're grieving, and how that really changes how we live. I knew last week intuitively that for this heartbreak to be felt and expressed and dissolved, it needed to be screamed. Sometimes it just does. You know, we allow babies to cry until they're old enough to comprehend the words, "Don't cry," or "You're making a scene," or "All right, no treats for you later." We literally get punished for crying. But what does that do to all the emotions that we carry that we want to express? Where does that leave us when we're really hurt and we need to express ourselves through our voices? What does that do to our power? It squashes it. Yeah. And I know enough about grief and enough about my own coping methods to know that I couldn't stay squashed. I couldn't keep it in for another minute. I could not contain my pain. That's just not me. I can't be a container anymore for pain. That's not me. So I just let it out. And the police showed up. Yeah, it's funny that sirens are going around right by my window right now because that's who it was. The police showed up. But I got taken care of that day. And I got in the shower and I went to sleep. I reset. My goal in releasing last week's episode, Grief Growers, is to show you, to remind you, to tell you in my own sniffling and crying words that sometimes grief isn't attractive. Sometimes grief is just loaded with pain. Sometimes grief is ugly and smeared and wet and loud and childish and nasty. It is. And it brings up all of this crummy, filthy, terrifying, earth-shattering darkness in us. It brings all of our fears just right up to the surface. But what I found last week and what I'm still finding and what I'm still hearing from you and from all the truths that are shared in this episode is that the best way out is through. The best way for all of this emotion to come out of you is to let it move through you. Let it consume you for as long as it needs to. Let it consume you. Cry it out, scream it out, pound it out, play it out, drive it out, write it out, feel it out. I promise you, and I know it doesn't seem like it in the moment. I know it seems endless, but the pain will and does end. The pain is not your fault. You didn't choose this. The pain does not and cannot touch all aspects of your life. There is pure love out there in friends and family. And the pain will end. I am living proof of that. I'm not faking it this week, you guys. I'm okay. I'm not great, but I'm okay. The pain will end. I am living proof of that. And so are you. God, I love you, my grief growers. Thank you for supporting me through your words and your messages last week. Together, we can always make it through because we have before. Yeah, that's the truth. That's the truth I have for you this week. Up next, I'll answer a listener question about how to support family at a funeral. I got this question from a Facebook friend and fellow business owner Mona Luan. Mona teaches Ashtanga Yoga for Beach Yoga Chicago, and I just absolutely love her. She's a person who inspires me to be more colorful and more true to myself, and I think that's just really cool. When I asked if I could air her question on the show, I asked her to give me a link to her work as well. So if you're into people with awesome rainbow hair or yoga in the Chicago area, you can find her work and links to her super cool social media. Her Instagram is my favorite, over at monalovesyoga.com. That's Mona, M-O-N-A, loves as in adores, and yoga is in the practice of yoga.com. Mona wrote me last month. She said, "Hi, Shelby. I just started listening to your podcast and OMG, your voice is so beautiful." Thank you, Mona. "Do you have any resources on the grief and loss around dementia and Alzheimer's? My grandmother passed away over the weekend. It's a bittersweet passing since she's no longer suffering, and I've kind of had to say goodbye a long time ago, but it's still a death and it's still sad. I'm going to the wake and church services in the next couple of days and don't really know how to handle death, like what to say to my family members that were much closer to her in order to support them." I replied, "Hi, Mona. Oh my goodness, I am so incredibly sorry. Despite the fact that saying goodbye a long time ago is a reality for you and your family, death is still kind of an end-all be-all. Good on you for recognizing that. In terms of resources, keep listening to the show. In episode 3, I actually cover both of these topics. The listener question is about the definition of anticipatory grief, where we learn about what it's like to grieve people before they actually die. And I shared a story of a woman's journey with dementia with her husband in a facility. And then in the actual meat of the show and the heart of the show, there are 9 ways to support someone who's grieving. First, in the immediate aftermath. Second, in the weeks and months that follow. And then third, in a lifetime for a griever. So start there. Also, just big time breathe. And know that there is no wrong way to grieve unless you're telling somebody else how to. People will probably feel and express all kinds of emotions at this funeral. Relief, pain, humor, discomfort, sadness, silence, etc. Just let it all be. Also, if people are huggers or hand holders, I find that physical contact at a funeral can often speak beyond our words, but definitely use your gut on that one. You've got this. So this is a short listener question this week, but super, super useful as a teachable moment. What do people need in the midst of loss? Stories and evidence of other people going through it. Check. Tips for responding to the people outside of themselves. Check. And the reassurance that someone believes in them and has their back. Check. If you're going to a funeral soon, trust me, you've got this. You do. Breathe for yourself. Be there and breathe. Listen to episode 3 of this podcast. There are so many ways to comfort people who are grieving, but mostly just be there for them. Cry with them. Listen to what they have to say about the person that you're losing. Ask them to tell stories and memories. These are the things that bond. Hug them. Hold their hands. Know that people are going to be thinking and feeling a huge variety of things. And that's just the nature of funerals as events. I've got your back. If you have tips for handling a funeral, leave a voicemail or text 312-725-3043 or email shelby@shelbyforsythia.com. We would love to hear your thoughts. If you're going to a funeral soon and would like the support of others, I strongly encourage you to join my private Facebook group called The Grief Growers Garden. We do a lot of listening and supporting and storytelling for each other there. You can ask your own question to be featured on the show, again by leaving a voicemail or texting 312-725-3043 or emailing shelby@shelbyforsythia.com, and you can always find both of these contacts in the show notes. Next up, we'll talk to Cindy Klinger about her father's suicide, caretaking, grieving, and becoming a voice for change. Cindy Klinger is a Chicago-based integrative dietitian whose work involves supporting people in reaching their health goals and feeling their best. Since her dad died in 2015 by medication-induced suicide, she helps to raise awareness about akathisia, a potential side effect of psychotropic and other medications that leads to such agitation and restlessness that it can cause suicide as well as homicide. She's on the board of MISSD, the Medication-Induced Suicide Prevention and Education Foundation in memory of Stuart Dolan, and is an advocate for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. This interview was recorded via phone.
So I want to do something a little bit different to open up this interview and have you share a piece that you wrote about your loss.
Sure. So it's just titled Dad. I wrote this at 1:30 in the morning several months after my dad died, and I just could not sleep, and it just kind of came tumbling out of my head. Okay. 5 months before my dad killed himself, he texted me that he had had his arteries checked, and they were all clear. I have to be around for my girl, he wrote. That's how I know how out of his mind he was when he died, singularly focused on ending his pain. My dad said things like that a lot. He was prolific when it came to letting me know how much I was loved. We were in touch every day, pretty much. He'd often tell me how lucky he was to have me as a daughter, check in to see how my day was going, or text me a, "Good night, honey." He would ask me to text him after I landed safely on the ground after a flight. He didn't want me to struggle and made sure I didn't want for much. That's why I was still on the family cell phone plan at 35. And why he tacked my car onto his XM radio package. And why he regularly asked how I was doing financially, if I needed a little cushion, given my writer, grad school, nutritionist salaries over the years. Once in a while, he'd send me photo collages of myself as a little girl and write on them words like, "No one was as cute as you." Oh, the biased eyes of a parent. If he could have transported me back in time to when I was 2 and lived in the room above his, he would have. Even though at that age I would wake him up regularly just to let him know I couldn't sleep. I called him for advice, ranging from solving car issues to figuring out my finances and relationship concerns. A big tech and gadget whiz, he would set up my computers, give me tutorials on iPhone features, and offer me hand-me-down iPads, speakers, and digital cameras. He helped me figure out how I could afford my first condo, coming to the closing to make sure I asked all the right questions. When I moved to new cities, he was there, helping me pack, hanging pictures in apartments, buying me a winter coat and a nice dinner or two. I leaned on him more than I should have, but it was okay. He'd be around until I learned the ways of the world. He thought I was naive to those ways, too idealistic and not pragmatic enough. I thought he was too conservative and closed-minded. He started showing signs of anxiety and depression in 2005, 10 years before he died. Episodes would come and go, then became more frequent. Akathisia, a side effect of the psychotropic medications he was on, was what ultimately drove him to suicide. He couldn't stop moving. He'd lie down to sleep and bolt right back up, pace around the house, stomp in place, even try to jump out of moving cars. We learned that the inner restlessness is too much to take for most people, and death often becomes the only welcome relief. He, like others, described it as torture. We tried Western and Eastern approaches, neurofeedback, ECT, talk therapy, neurotransmitter support, supplements, energy work, new doctors. It was becoming a permanent situation, and he saw his future looking bleaker and bleaker. "Don't worry about anything," he would tell me sometimes during his healthy moments. "Let me do the worrying for you." I never did, and I realized that no one can do the worrying for anyone else. We can support each other, of course, but we must carry our own burdens. My tough, storytelling, dynamic, street-smart dad was more fragile than we ever knew. When I had to learn the ways of the world, it was quick and fast. I met with a lawyer and started the process of guardianship of my father, who did not fight me on it. The morning he died, we were planning to move him into an assisted living facility. He did not want to go. My family and I knew his death by suicide was likely. He had tried twice before in less than 3 years, and his psychologist had warned us that the third time is usually the charm. He had just been released from an inpatient psychiatric hospital and was actively talking about wanting to die. I felt like I was in a race to save a man's life. The irony is that my dad would have done anything to take away even the smallest hint of pain I ever had, and his death has caused me the worst suffering of my life. But no one can do the worrying or the grieving for me. Despite my father's best intentions, he couldn't either. I would take him back in a second, but I have become stronger, more independent, and more savvy. I've become an advocate for suicide prevention, joined the board of an organization that aims to prevent medication-induced suicides, and I'm looking to focus my private practice in nutrition on brain wellness. The fierce love my dad showed me throughout my life bolsters me on a regular basis. As I make decisions, get my car tuned up, make career moves, even choose who to date, I hear his voice in my head. I value his opinion, but we still have the parent-child conflict. Sometimes I listen, sometimes I don't. I'm becoming more and more my own person. 6 months after my dad died, I had a dream in which he told me he was in Finley Park. I searched everywhere he and I had ever lived to see if there was a Finley Park in those cities and towns. I couldn't find anything. A few months later, I was looking to foster a dog, and as I scrolled through an email with several dogs in need of homes, one named Finley caught my attention. I have since adopted her, and she adds so much joy, laughter, and love into my life. I'd like to think my dad, in a way, sent her to me to ease my burdens a little. Her middle name is Louisa, after my dad, Louis. And I think he'd agree that when it comes to dogs, no one is as cute as she is.
I absolutely love that story. And I love that it came to you just all in one piece. I love your perspective on this because it seems like you've had a chance to step out a little bit and see from the outside how this has really shaped and transformed your life. Where I want to go with this, I think, is to talk a little bit more about things that might have been in your head either leading up to or immediately after his suicide, because I don't think it's something that a lot of people are familiar with. I think they're familiar with these drug commercials where side effects may include suicidal tendencies and all of that, but what was the struggle of dealing with mental health versus medication versus, like, was there a quest to find the right cocktail? Was it not even an option? Like, and then I guess in the aftermath, did you or your family somehow feel responsible for not being able to do more medically? Because it sounds like you guys took a lot of steps to try and prevent this. The line in your story, I felt like I was racing to save a dying man.
Yeah.
It just hit me so hard.
Yeah, I mean, it was a complicated situation because my mom actually and dad separated and then divorced not long before he died, like in the last couple of years before he died. So before that, she was, the primary kind of caretaker and was trying all these alternatives. My mom and I were a little bit more inclined to do kind of alternative types of treatment, and my dad kind of geared a little more toward Western medicine. So he wasn't as open to some of those things, and so we didn't really have much of a choice in terms of the medications and, like you said, the cocktail. So that was kind of what he chose, the route he chose to go. So, that's really what ultimately led to the akathisia, because medications are really the only thing that causes it. It's not a natural condition. So it's a side effect of SSRIs, psychotropic medications, but we've actually learned since that it can be other medications too, like Chantix and even some steroids and things like that. So everyone just reacts a little bit differently. And some people, I don't know if it's like based on genetics or exactly what the mechanism is, but they're just really sensitive to some of these medications. And so my dad, had reactions to certain things, and then he would kind of come out of it and be okay for a little while, and he would kind of experience the akathisia again. But the akathisia was awful to watch. I mean, it was like he literally could not stop moving. He would just pace around the house. He would, rub his hands up and down his legs. He would, like I said, try to get out of moving cars. And that wasn't, at that point, it wasn't to kill himself. It was just because he was so anxious. He didn't know what to do with himself. He was like so fidgety. And so that was really awful to watch. And then he would say things like, I feel like I'm being tortured like a dog. Like I think he felt like there were feelings on his skin, like almost like bugs crawling on him. And I mean, it was awful. And I think with suicide, people often think, just talking to other people who've experienced suicide loss, what could I have done? What could we have done? And there's so much guilt associated with it. And I know there is with different types of death too, but I think maybe even more so with suicide because, you feel like you should have been able to stop it and prevent it. And the thing with my dad versus some other people who take their lives is we knew it was coming. It didn't come out of nowhere. A lot of people didn't even know that their, loved one was going to kill themselves, but we knew that it was, a very likely thing because he had tried before and he was kind of talking about it and he just kept saying, like, I can't live like this. And so that's why I kind of said, like, I was on a race to save his life because I knew it was sort of imminent. And so at that point, my mom, was no longer living with my dad, and she was still very helpful and really cared about him and was helping me through this whole process. But I was pretty much doing a lot of this alone. Like, I have a brother, but we actually have different dads. So, he had hired caregivers, and I had taken off of work. He was living in Florida. I live in Chicago, and so I took off work and I was there for several weeks just trying to really get him help and tried, we found a new, more kind of integrative psychiatrist who was great, and said it was the worst case of akathisia he'd ever seen. And basically, without explicitly saying so, kind of indicated that he felt like it was too far gone, really. But he definitely tried what he could. And, I was just doing everything I could. I was taking my dad to different doctor's appointments and neurofeedback and just trying everything. But it was still just, the akathisia never really let up. So it was hard to watch.
What did it feel like becoming a primary caregiver for him? Because it sounds like from the story that you told, he was always in such a giving place for you. And a lot of times when children start to take care of their parents, there's this role reversal, but there's a lot of other feelings and emotions kind of swirled up within that.
Yeah, it feels, especially at his age, he was only 63 when he died, and I was 35, so it felt like, I had seen my mom go through it with her parents, like my grandma had dementia, and, but my mom at that time was in her 50s, my grandma was older, so it felt like I was too young to be doing this, and my dad was too young going through this, so it was definitely overwhelming. Like, I felt like I really had to kind of grow up in a sense, even though, I am a grown-up. I live on my own. I take care of myself. But it's a whole different level of, like, oh, my God, I have to make these major decisions and, like, call caregivers and take him to doctor's appointments. Yeah, I really had never been in that position before. And, yeah, it did feel like a role reversal because, like you said, he kind of was also overprotective. Like, even when I was in my 30s, he would like to, I think he liked that I called him for advice, or, he liked to be kind of a caretaker and treat me to little things like dinner, And so I think it was this really weird situation, like, going through the process of becoming a guardian of him felt like, oh my gosh. And I was actually really surprised that he didn't fight me on it because, he was, when he wasn't, kind of in the throes of either akathisia or his depression or anxiety, was like, kind of this tough, like, dynamic personality. So it was just weird to see him, like he kind of regressed back into like a child, So,
wow. Yeah.
Yeah, like just really needy and kind of like confused as well. And so, yeah, it was definitely a weird experience, and but I just had to do it. Like, I was like, okay, like, this is the situation I'm in. I'm trying to save his life, like, literally. So I was just like doing research, and my family was very supportive. They just weren't physically there. So I was trying to make these decisions with them. And my dad has two siblings, my aunt and uncle, so they were really supportive as well. And yeah, all tried to be there for each other, but it was definitely really overwhelming.
I hear you on that for sure. And I know you touched on the fact that the suicide is different than other suicides because it was expected. And this is going to come very poorly phrased, but did that make it easier for you and your family when it finally happened?
You know what? I actually think in a way it did. I would say yes and no. So when it happens, you're still shocked. I mean, I'm still shocked almost 2.5 years later. Like, I still have said many times in the last few weeks to friends and family, like, I still just can't wrap my head around it. Like, I don't get how my dad is not here on this earth anymore. So I think it's always a shock, no matter, even if you're sort of expecting it. But at the same time, I'm not sure that I would say the fact that we sort of thought it might happen made it easier, but the fact that he'd attempted suicide before, this was his third attempt. And so we, like my mom, my aunt, and my uncle are all kind of at peace with it in a sense. Even though none of us wanted this and we all find it really difficult, we, are pretty clear that this is what he wanted. He was suffering so much that he had, tried several times, and this is like the path that, kind of he needed to take in a sort of like from a spiritual place. But I don't know that it's a hard question. I don't know that it makes it easier necessarily, but I think in a way it kind of does. I think if it had come out of completely nowhere and we had no clue it was coming, I do think it would be harder to find some peace with it, because I think then you're even more like, well, what could I have done? How could I not have seen this? Like the fact that we knew and we were I feel like we really tried everything we could, and the fact that it happened from like this existential place, okay, we finally had to just let him do this in a way, even though we didn't, let him, but you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. There was kind of the word release is popping up into my head. You're almost like you're free to go now, and it hurts and it sucks, and nobody really wants this, but I'm hearing some kind of like a sense of relief, maybe.
From my mom,
or just like a visible end to whatever he was going through.
Yeah, even today's his birthday. He would have been 66, and so my mom texted me, and she said, I'm thinking of him so much today, and just knowing that he's at peace. And she's said that many times. Like, I just know now he's at peace, and I know that's a lot of people say that when someone dies, and I think because he was like suffering so much and like felt so tortured, and we do kind of say that to each other. Although I think it's easier for my mom to feel that way. Like, I'm like, yeah, I know, but what else? I have a little more like, but what if we could have done this? So everyone within the family still, I think, reacts a little bit differently. But overall, I've let go a lot of the guilt. It still comes up a little bit, but I've released a lot of it.
I want to know a little bit more about the immediate aftermath. What was life like for you then? Not just in terms of logistics, like did you move and planning a ceremony and things like that, but what place emotionally and mentally, like where was your heart at this time?
Well, it's really interesting because right when we found out, I didn't even cry. Like, the caregiver was there. So he had slipped out basically while the caregiver was there, and like into the garage, taken the car, and drove to a bridge. And the caregiver was, I think she was like in the kitchen, like cutting up an apple or something, so she didn't even see him, and I was sleeping. It was early morning, and so we were like, I got a phone call from one of his good friends who told me, because my dad had called him and told him he was driving to the bridge in Sarasota, the Ringling Bridge. And I was so confused. I was like, what do you mean? Like, he's in his bedroom. And so I'm like getting out of bed, like looking around, and then he's not in his room. And I go into the garage, and, I saw one of his cars was gone. And so then, kind of hit me, and then we were waiting. Like, we didn't know like what the outcome was going to be. So that was really crazy. And when we found out, my aunt had come over, and when we found out, it didn't hit me right away, And I was like comforting the caregiver because she like fell to the ground, because I think she was like, oh my God, must have felt guilty and shocked. and then my mom got there later, and then, then it kind of hit me. But I think the first day it was a little bit, the first probably few weeks, but especially the first day was kind of surreal. Like, I don't feel like I was crying as much then almost as I was later. And then the next few weeks were just so hectic because I knew I had to do all this stuff before I came back to Chicago. Like, we literally had to put his house on the market. We had to, clean out his entire house, put his house on the market, plan the memorial. So we were, going through his things, immediately. And my family came, my cousin and my brother and my uncle was there and aunt. So we were, going through his things right away, kind of hey, do you want this? So it was a lot. And they were kind of, my family was kind of I know this must be hard for you. Tell us if you don't want us, and I wanted them to have things of his, but it was just oh my God, there was no time to even think.
It sounds like an expedited process.
Yeah, and I do remember one moment that still kind of bothers me because, I just was, wanted to lie in my dad's bed and just, kind of feel close to him. And I remember one moment where my cousin and his wife and my boyfriend at the time were they wanted to go out for a little bit, and I didn't want to go. And my mom and my aunt were you should really get out for a little, it will be good for you. And so I ended up going, and it was fine, but I really felt in that moment, I should not. I just wanted to, stay home, and, I knew we were getting rid of, his bed soon, and, all these things, and then I wouldn't even have, these pieces of him to be close to, and I just felt I didn't want to go anywhere. I just wanted to be home, near his stuff, and it just felt too soon for me to, be going out and, taking pictures and smiling,
Yes, absolutely.
And so I said something to my mom later. I'm you guys pushed me to go out, and I didn't want to. And, it was just this one moment. It wasn't, this ongoing thing where they were pushing me to do things. But I just remember that clearly as an example of, you need to listen to what you need at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And not really just do things to appease other people. So. Right.
And it's so hard in the aftermath of a loss to really tune into what you're wanting in the moment because, A, other people have expectations of you and you should go out and it will make you feel better. And then B, we experience big losses like that so infrequently that it's almost default to follow other people's template or society's template for what to do. We don't really have that 100% trust in our gut instincts when things like this happen.
Right, you're
so our instinct to lie down, we're is this the right thing to do? Yeah, and so it's so much easier to say, I guess it would be good for me because everybody else is saying it's good for me, and I've never experienced this before, so maybe it is. Maybe it's something I don't.
Yeah, I was thinking about it recently. I'm it's almost after, a breakup or something like that where you are kind of wallowing for a while, and I don't know if that's the right term because I don't know if that sounds minimizing it, wallowing, but I feel
mm-hmm.
You kind of need to do that for a while. Just be really, really sad before you can at some point start to put one foot in front of the other again, it's okay for a while to feel awful and not want to move. There were times, so when I got back to Chicago after, all of that, there were times when I would just sit on my bed and stare at my boyfriend and be I would just stare at him, not saying anything. And just be in this other world, I don't even know what to do right now. And I think he was just I don't know what to do for you, and I was I don't know either, just these moments. And it really does, I think, come in, for me, it came in waves, like I've read about so much, where I'd kind of be okay for a while, and then something would happen where, I'd hear a song, or just even I would just start thinking about my dad or something, and it would just totally hit me. Wait, sorry, my dog.
Yeah.
Hold on. Finley, come here.
Is that, oh my gosh, it's Finley. I just love that she was in the story and now she's here and we can all hear her.
I know. She's so sweet. I know, that dream was so vivid. It was really so crazy.
I want to know, and the barking's fine. Hi, Finley. I'm interested in this space of like the aftermath of his death and kind of piecing your life back together, what was it that caused you to really come back to life again? Was it a resource or a class or a book or a person who said something and you're like, oh my gosh, I can step back into, I don't want to call it the real world, but like a fully conscious life? Like what pulled you kind of out of the numbness of that?
You know, I was thinking about this recently because as an integrative dietitian, like I look at things holistically and kind of a person as a whole and all the pieces fitting together, not just like, here's your heart and here's your liver, like everything's connected. And I think that's sort of how I approach my grieving process, not intentionally, but just because it's what felt natural to me. So, in other words, I kind of jumped into a lot of things at once because I like to research and kind of figure things out. Like, literally I think the day he died or the day after, I was already researching more about akathisia because we knew what it was, but we didn't really understand, like, the full extent of it, really. And so, right. I don't know, I wanted to find out if there were any resources or organizations, and I came across MIST, the Medication-Induced Suicide Prevention and Education Foundation, in memory of Stuart Dolan, which is, I know, a mouthful. And they were based in Chicago, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to get in touch with them. And so basically they are an organization that raises awareness about akathisia. Like, that's their simple mission, is that we just want to educate people about, you know, what akathisia is. If you start, stop, or change a medication and notice any increased agitation, restlessness, you know, really ramped up anxiety, that we need to call attention to this person's doctor. And so we want people, you know, family members to know about this, social workers, like people who are kind of watching out for this person who might be getting treatment.
Yeah.
So now I'm on the board of this organization. I mean, I got in touch with them right away, and I ended up meeting them for, like, the director and the founder for dinner, and just shared my story, and I just wanted to channel my energy in that direction of getting the word out of, you know, how can I spread this? Like,
were they surprised to hear from you so soon after your loss?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I've met so many people who are like, wow, I couldn't have done certain things so soon after my loss. And I think everyone, you know, is on their own timetable. For me, it just felt really like I needed to do this. It was just really helpful for me. And I remember at one point my aunt was like, you know, maybe it's too much suicide stuff, because I had also gotten involved with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and I started to go to, like, 3 months after my dad died, I went to, they have like a conference every year, and one of the days of the conference is just for suicide survivors, they call them, like lost survivors, not for, like, the other days are for professionals, like social workers and things like that, but one day is just for healing. And so I went to that, like, 3 months after my dad died, and I just wanted to kind of do all these things. And my aunt, I remember at one point she was kind of concerned because I think I called her crying one night, like, missing my dad. And she said, maybe it's just too much suicide stuff on your mind, like maybe you're talking about it too much and thinking about it too much. But I knew for me that didn't make it worse, you know, like I was already thinking about it. So to be around other people who kind of had a similar experience or understood, or I don't know, it was just really helpful. I also got involved in Catholic Charities has a loss, they call it loss, program here in Chicago, which is basically support groups for people who've lost someone to suicide. So they have, for people who've lost someone, I think within the first year, it's like an 8-week support group where you're kind of going through it weekly with the same people. And then after that, they have, like, I still go to drop-in meetings sometimes, and that's open to anyone. So I did that, and then I did a more general grief support group. I became an advocate for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, which is kind of a little bit of public policy, like writing letters and making phone calls to Congress people. And I went to Springfield for one day and tried to get the message across. And so I've just done these different things that again, for me, just felt really, I think it helped me move forward. I mean, I read a lot of books. I watched movies about suicide, like documentaries, any documentary that was related to suicide, like trying to understand and just, I don't know, I just found it comforting to, I don't know, I guess try to understand or hear other people's stories.
I love that because that's very similar to my story where the instant I lost my mom is like, I have to research this and figure out what I'm going through because there have to be other people who have experienced this. Was that ever like an innate instinct in you, or did anybody ever tell you about the power of sharing stories in a community, or did this just happen and that was your first thought or your gut instinct? Like, were you raised in a family that told stories to relieve pain? Where did that urge come from?
I mean, that's a good question. No, I wouldn't say I was necessarily, I mean, stories in a certain sense. Actually, my dad told a lot of stories, like the same stories for years. My mom was like, okay, I heard this one 20,000 times, like, but not necessarily for this purpose, right? Like for healing, it was more just like, this is a funny story, make people laugh,
Yeah.
But I think the support group thing, no, I don't know. I think I just thought like, oh, this is what people do. They go to support groups and, of course I've heard of people going to support groups and finding it useful and it's just like a place, it's just sort of this carving out this space that you can cry. Like I can tell the same, I'll go to a support group meeting and talk to a friend maybe about something. And like when I'm in the support group, like I know I might end up crying because I'm just like in this space where it's like everyone else gets it. I don't know. It's really interesting. Like it's not like I try not to cry, with a friend or, then I know I can cry in the support group, but it sometimes just happens. Like being in that environment just allows you to release a little bit more. So I'm not sure. I don't know that anyone necessarily told me I should do that. I think it was just one of those things that I was like, okay, this is one avenue to go. That might be helpful, because I was just kind of looking for things that would be helpful. That was just like one piece of it. I also was doing a lot of like yoga because I felt like being in this sort of dark room, like in a little corner, like in my own world on my mat was just helpful too, to just be like kind of, I don't know, like contained sort of.
Getting a picture of like a sanctuary.
Yeah.
Like a home base for you.
And then of course, like you talk about a lot is like rituals. So like, like his first birthday that passed a few months later after he died, like my boyfriend at the time and I, we got a Frappuccino in my dad's honor because he loved Frappuccinos from Starbucks. So we like got a Frappuccino and, and just little things like that.
I love that.
Yeah. But yeah, so, I mean, that kind of thing, or like I, dropped some things into Lake Michigan at one point, just like my own little kind of ritual for him, like that, things that meant something to me and like about grief and about my dad and for his, so we had a memorial service, like, I don't know, what was it, like a week after he died, something like that. And then I went, so that was in February. And then in June, actually it happened to be over Father's Day weekend. So a few months later, I went back to Sarasota because we did something called, it was like an eternal wreath, a wreath ball, REEF. So basically, it's like an eco-friendly option for people. So he was cremated and then his ashes were put into this wreath ball that become like a living reef for fish, like coral can grow on it.
Cool. I have never heard of that.
It was amazing because first of all, you can decorate the reef with things, anything you want. So we, like his friends and some family gathered and we put things into it because it's kind of like a clay ceramic thing. So we could put things into it that he loved and cared about. Like, I said he was kind of really into gadgets, so we put like, his iPhone and his stylus and just little mementos and tokens of things like we wanted, everyone put different things in there. Like I think we put a Dunkin' Donuts card in there that he loves donuts and, like little things. And like his eyeglass case, like he had more more of those like cheap like reading glasses we found after he died. Like he had like 30 pairs. We're like, oh my god, who needs this many? So like we put one of those in there, and anyway, and then we went out on a boat and like had this beautiful ceremony where they lowered into the water and like say their name, and I mean it was incredible. Like all of a bunch of his friends and some family went, and it was just like really touching and beautiful. And then we have the coordinates of where he is in Sarasota Bay, so we can go out like anytime and see.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So yeah, so that was like really special and healing, and felt really, like this beautiful kind of like memorial and like token of our love to him, and kind of like this ritual that was really fitting for him because he was a boater and loved going out on the water with his friends. And so it was like, I knew exactly, like, we're doing this, like there was no question of how we were going to, bury him or memorialize him. So all of those things together, just like, the reading, the support group, getting involved in different things, journaling, yoga, it all just helps. And talking about it, like I have such great friends and family, and I think a lot of people with suicide feel like they can't talk about it and it's stigmatized. I don't know if that's more of a generational thing, but I never felt like that. Like people were really open to talking about it and supportive. So that really helped too. The other thing is, I think something that helps with grief a lot is, and I've read this too, is just talking about it. Like, trying to answer all these questions, especially maybe with suicide, because there's so many more questions a lot of times, I think, than with other types of deaths. Like, why did this really happen? Even though you might have a sense of why it happened, you still don't fully understand. Like, why did they decide to do this? So you have to ask these questions over and over until, I've read this, like, over and over until you don't need to know anymore, or until it's sort of resolved in your mind. And so, like, my mom and I have had the same conversations so many times, like, trying to sort of psychoanalyze my dad. And, like, we can keep doing it we've done it recently, like, years, a couple years later, and that helps, too, like, just talking about it and trying to understand from every angle and, like, what was his childhood like that might have led to some of these issues later in his life, and really, he retired really young, like maybe that contributed to it, and, like all these things that we were trying to figure out. I think being able to talk about it without someone being like, okay, I think you've talked about it enough, like just giving you the space to be able to go over and over the same things until you kind of don't need to anymore. So we don't need to as much anymore, I'll say that.
It's a gift, that empathic listening of listening without judgment, listening without analyzing or criticizing or fixing. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's a real gift, and I've heard that as well.
Yeah, and the thing is, I'm surrounded by therapists. Like my brother's a marriage and family therapist. My best friend's a psychologist. So, that also helps to get some free therapy.
That's also a gift. Absolutely. And then I want to know, how the person you are today, you said almost about 2.5 years later, is different from the person that you were before your dad's loss. And this can pertain to anything, not even just your relationship with him, which of course has changed, but every aspect of your life. How has your perspective changed since this experience?
I mean, it's so interesting because I was just saying to my mom recently, I'm like, I don't know, like a lot of people feel like they're like this different person after this huge loss, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm a different person. And so, I'm sure in some ways I am, because how can you not be? But I still, I don't know that I can put it into words necessarily, except to say, of course, I do think, I've learned to be pretty resilient and stronger than I realized I could be, because I think before my dad died, I used to think about, like, oh, one day my parents are going to die, and, like, how am I going to survive that? Like, I don't think I can live without my parents. Like, how am I supposed to do that? And, and now I'm like, okay, well, I guess I can. Although there's moments, like, I can remember one moment clearly, probably within the first year of his dying, that I got really panicked and thinking, like, I don't know how I'm supposed to live, like, without him on this earth, you know, like it just felt so foreign and like lonely because your parents are like the most familiar people in the world to you, you know, like they've been there since before day one, you know, and it's like my dad's voice is like one of the most familiar voices to me in the world, and how am I supposed to do this? But, you know, then you just kind of take it day by day, put one foot in front of the other, and have a new reality. And there's always a huge void. Like, it's just a huge void in my life. But, you know, I still feel like pretty happy every day, even though I still miss him a lot. And sometimes it's way harder than others. So, yeah, I mean, I think I've just had to take on a lot more, like, you know, from figuring out all this stuff with, you know, his guardianship and caregivers and, you know, kind of growing up in that way, and then, you know, putting his house on the market and selling it and all of that. And now, I mean, he was the person I would go to for, like, those kinds of questions, and I don't have him to go to anymore. And I mean, I have other people, like his brother, my uncle is kind of my surrogate dad now, and my mom is really helpful. You know, so I have people, but I'm also like, okay, I'm 37. I can make some decisions on my own. I don't need, you know, to ask people for so much advice. So I think, yeah, I mean, growing up, becoming a little more independent are definitely two big things. And then I think also it's just comforting yourself. Like, yes, I have great friends and family, and I can always turn to them, but I don't actually love crying in front of people. I don't know.
Believe it or not, most people don't.
I was just going to say, like, I don't know who does, but, like, a lot of times, it's funny because I really like to talk about a lot of my feelings and things, but a lot of times, like, when I've been kind of in a sad place, I just would rather be alone. So that's kind of a little bit of a shift that I've noticed. The other thing is, I feel like I was really private before about my family and, like, any issues going on, like with my dad before he died. And now afterwards, I've kind of been like, you know what? Like, I want to share his story and talk about suicide and not kind of hide it or protect him, or like, because I feel like actually talking about it is a tribute to him and can help other people. So
I love that.
Yeah, so that's also been a big change, I would say.
Well, we're wrapping up at the end here, but I want to let our listeners know where they can find you if they want to get in touch and learn more about akathisia or suicide, loss, or prevention, and then anything else related to any projects you're working on. Where would you like to be found?
Sure. Well, my website for my nutrition practice is cindyklinger.com. So that's CINDYKLINGER.com. And people can find me there and reach out, you know, about nutrition or anything else they want to. And I think nutrition and just healthy living and healthy lifestyle, like getting enough sleep and exercising, you know, also plays such a huge role in kind of staying healthy while you're grieving. I know that those are also really important. And so if anyone wanted to contact me about, you know, healthy eating habits and lifestyle habits that can support them during a grieving process, I would totally welcome that as well.
Rock on.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Cindy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. It was really great to be here.
So that's all for this episode of Coming Back. Thank you so much to my friend Cindy Klinger, who first found my name and business card in a coffee shop, and then we reconnected and just have stayed in touch ever since. So honored to have you on our show today. If you'd like to check out Cindy's work, you can find her website at cindyklinger.com. I would be so grateful if for my 25th, my antique birthday, you could leave some reviews and some thoughts on my Facebook page, Shelby Forsythia Intuitive Grief Guide. Thank you always to the amazing, talented Addie Goldstein for composing our theme music. I listen to it even when I'm not recording, and it makes me smile. You can always find me on Facebook at Shelby Forsythia Intuitive Grief Guide, Instagram at Grief Guide Shelby Forsythia, or simply shelbyforsythia.com. If you'd like to leave a question or a comment for a future show, leave a voicemail or text 312-725-3043 or email me, shelby@shelbyforsythia.com, subject line podcast. As always, my dear grief growers, it was beautiful sharing this space and time with you. I see you. I am proud of you and the work that you're doing in the world. And I love you. We're here to support each other because even through grief, we are growing.